Okay.
So it's just about 3 o'clock. So I think I will begin. So what I had done last week, I know some of you weren't able to hook on, but I really took us through the rest of the history of the Jews in Spain, which of course, unfortunately, and with the expulsion of the Jews in 1492. Now there are, of course, still Jews living in Spain, but they have at this point already, in order to be able to have remained there, they are all conversos. They have all converted to Christianity. And you can imagine over the hundreds of years, I mean, the Inquisition lasts into the 19th century. So these people can never, ever live any modicum of Jews. And obviously the fear, of somebody informing on them and then being arrested and tortured and then burned at the auto da fe. So even though some people think, well, they have certain customs which they feel perhaps derived from certain Jewish roots, they intermarried over, centuries of time. They really are no longer Jews. And I don't know as many, even these people who feel they have some of these odd customs in their families have necessarily any desire to return to Judaism. But we're going to turn today actually to the Jews of Portugal. I know Shalom gave a lecture on it, but I want to explain it in greater depth. The Jews, don't forget, who are the bulk of the Jews who come to Portugal in 1492? Now, there already is, and I will backtrack and explain that in a few minutes. There is already a Jewish community in Portugal, but it's obviously, considerably stronger. So, but those Jews, those people who opt to leave Spain in 1492, those are people who want to live completely Jewish lives. They have no interest in converting to Christianity. So, nowadays we talk about the Spanish Portuguese Jews. Really, they are Portuguese Jews because it was only the Portuguese Jews who eventually, obviously, will leave. First of all, they already were committed to Judaism, so they were stronger in their beliefs, and they do gradually escape to other lands and where they can live, obviously, openly as Jews. But obviously, originally, the bulk of them came from Spain, but it is really the Portuguese, Jews who have, clung, over all these centuries to their traditions and beliefs. All right. So again, we had talked about how the Edict of Expulsion came into being in 1492. It's interesting, the Inquisition in Spain only came to be initially in 1478, but really in 1480, it gets more and more established. And in 1483, Torquemada is then chosen to be the Grand Inquisitor. And now you know how horrible it becomes from that point on. Ferdinand and Isabella only gained total control of the country as monarchs in 1479. Everything's going to progress very rapidly within a period of a dozen years. And then with the fall of Granada, which is in early 1492, and I had mentioned this, last time. I mean, to me, the height of, cruelty and showing a total lack of gratitude. The money for this campaign had come from some very, very wealthy Jews. And now they finally, they've gotten rid of their Muslims. And now Ferdinand and Isabella decide, well, now they're going to get rid of all their Jews too. And they've already taken our money, but now it's okay to expel us completely from the country. Or obviously with the choice, you could convert to Christianity. So Granada falls in January. The edict comes out already in March. It becomes more publicized in the month of May, and they all have to leave officially by the end of July. In actuality, the last day they actually leave is August 2nd, which happens to be Tisha B'Av. And I had mentioned that Columbus, when he writes his log, his diary, he set sail on that self-same day, that August 2nd. And he writes that he was delayed with leaving because there were all these boatloads of Jews who were fleeing at the same time, and so he couldn't get out of the port, until those ships had moved on. And we know for a fact that a lot of the money that came to help to finance Columbus's expedition, which he does on behalf of the King of Spain, although he comes from Italy, and that money came from Jews. Many of the instruments for navigation on board, they were produced by Jewish scientists at the time period, mathematicians, map makers, and he definitely had on board certain individuals who were most, it appears, are conversos. All right. At this point, they are Christian. They just so you understand that the only people who are living Jewish, outwardly Jewish lives are those who are leaving. Right. Everyone who is remaining in Spain must live a Christian lifestyle in order to be allowed to remain there. So I want to talk to you now a little bit more about those Jews of Portugal. First, I just want to show you the map. So I hope you can see I've outlined where Portugal is. So you see it's actually surrounded by Spain, obviously all the way to the east, but also to the north. It is only open on the south and the west, okay? And it's all surrounded by the Atlantic Ocean and this little bit of the Mediterranean, as the Mediterranean feeds into the Atlantic Ocean. And that eastern border with Spain, that's a mountainous region, so it wasn't so easy to traverse. I mentioned that last time. Or they could have left by boat from southern Spain and gone all the way around, and that way came to live in Portugal. Okay, but we know that there were Jews in Portugal before this. They did not just arrive in 1492. In general, up until this time period, up until actually 1497, the Jews have been welcomed to live in Portugal. They've become prosperous there. They are used by the kings, various things. Those things are never 100% perfect, but by and large, it was a good existence for the Jews, and they did manage to prosper when they lived there. So even though all these horrible things are happening in Spain, Portugal sort of is an oasis. And starting even in 1391, when those first beginning horrible massacres occurred in Spain, spreading, remember, from Castile into Aragon, and thousands of Jews were put to death then, or some of them are attacks on conversos, as well. So there already is, I'll backtrack even more, there is already a population of Jews living in Portugal, even before 1391, but there's now going to be a larger trickle of Spanish Jews who are going to make their way and come to live in Portugal at that time. So let's just talk a little bit about the early days of Jewry in Portugal. So, there's always a theory, well, maybe even in Solomon's times or Shlomo HaMelech's time, maybe some people came and settled there. We don't have any proof of that at all. Just the fact that, there are some mentions or allusions to perhaps some Jews had come then. But certainly if they are, we're talking about like a handful. But definitely around in the Roman period, we know for sure Spain is settled then by more and more Jews. And so most likely in Portugal too, they are making a presence there. And definitely after the time period of when the Roman Empire falls, and then the Visigoths come in and take over, we know how cruelly they treated the Jews of Spain. So they're also doing the same to the Jews who were at that point, again, a small population, but those who are living in Portugal. Things will change with the Moorish invasion, which is in the year 711. And things become very, very good for the Jews, and they get governmental positions, and as people who engage in trade, they're doing rather well. That the Reconquista begins. Now, it doesn't affect just Spain. The Reconquista, in other words, reconquering Moorish Muslim Spain to bring it back into the Christian fold. So it's also taking place in Portugal. It's not just a Spanish phenomenon. Now, because the Jews at this point, as merchants, as tradesmen, but having dealt with the Muslims for so many years, they know Arabic. So they're used as spies, and they are also used as diplomats, so on both ends. There's now going to be a new house that's going to rule over Portugal. It's actually called the House of Burgundy. I presume it has some relationship with those, with France. The first king, his name is Alfonso the First. He lived from, not that he lived, but he ruled from 1139 to 1185. He actually had appointed, Jews were doing well at this point in time, right? So we're talking about the 12th century. And he actually had confidence in the Jews, who lived in his land, and actually appointed a Jew to be the supervisor of tax collection. Seems to be a favorite thing to make the Jews, be the tax collectors. But as a result, it also people hate them. The name of this individual, this Jew at this time, his name was Yahya ben Yahi. All right, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. And he also made him the first chief rabbi of Portugal. It's kind of interesting. The Jews are settling mostly in the towns, the cities, obviously Lisbon, as it's the capital. There's a heavy Jewish presence there. Now, Jews did own land, estates, but I don't think they were necessarily the farmers, that they just own, as they would prosper, they would, build perhaps lovely residences out in the countryside and, and then also orchards, et cetera, et cetera. But again, they are primarily urban dwellers. And this Alfonso, I told you, looked favorably upon the Jews who lived in Portugal at that time. So he actually granted the Jews and the Muslims who were still living there, he granted them charters to continue as merchants, and he guaranteed their freedom of worship, and that they could avail themselves of the law codes of that time period. Following him is another king. His name is Sancho I from 1185 to 1211. And this is the time period of the Crusaders. And some Crusaders obviously passed through his lands too, but he always protected the Jews. So things are good for the Jews, at this point. So we're now into the beginning of the 13th century. Just in general, when we talk now about the 13th into the 15th century and beyond, we're starting this age of discovery. There will be, the age of exploration, which will come a drop later, but it's going to start, at the end of this time period. Jews have very prominent positions, within the country at this time, both politically, economically. I saw in one source, I feel that the numbers of Jews in Portugal at this time might have been as much as 20%. So I don't know. There's another king who follows. I don't have to give you all their names. I don't know that it's, but things never last forever, So already, now I think a lot of this is because of the influx of those Spanish Jews following 1391. So all of a sudden, there are a lot more Jews, in the country, and a lot of resentment is going to grow, unfortunately, within the Portuguese population, because they're going to be taking positions within the government. They are going to become a major force, in the merchant class, and this resentment, unfortunately, is just going to grow. So already at the time period of King John the First. We'll learn more about John the Second. That's Shalom had mentioned him, but this is the first. He lived from 1385 to 1432. So again, those, the attacks on the Jews in 1391, that's within his reign. So now he's going to start putting some restrictions upon the Jews who live there. And the Jews have to wear a special sort of clothing, and they have to obey a curfew. All right, might not seem so terrible, but it's a beginning, and it's only going to get gradually worse. The following king, his name was Duarte. He was from 1433 to 1438. So now we're into the 15th century. Now another law is passed. Well, Jews can't employ Christians. Again, tolerable, maybe not ideal, but the Jews can. They're managing all right there. Just so you know, that the major communities at this time period are Lisbon and a town called Evora, which is just, try to underline, it's hard to see. It's a little southeast of Lisbon, all right? Later on, this map doesn't even show it. For example, there's a town of Porto, where port wine comes from, but it's not even on this map. So obviously, I don't know if it didn't exist or it wasn't anything major, okay? There is a town here called Coimbra, which apparently has the day and age. It's probably for hundreds of years. There's a university there. And then I'll tell you about some other places a little bit. Okay, let me go on. Now let's come to Alfonso V. Okay, so he goes from 1438 to 1481. And when you think of him, we think of Abarbanel. Now, Abarbanel, I'll just backtrack slightly just to tell you this so that you know, because this is his time period. He lived in that 15th century. His dates actually are 1437 to 1507. His grandfather came from the city of Seville in Spain, but, and he was an important political figure at the time, but during those horrible riots of 1391, where literally thousands of Jews were massacred, he was forced to convert to Christianity. I mean, if he wanted, I guess, to live. Now, he had a son. His name was Yehuda. He had this son smuggled out of Spain so that he could be raised as a Jew in Lisbon, Portugal. And then his son, so his grandson, is the famous Abarbanel, Don Yitzchak Abarbanel. Okay, so now I'm going to tell you a little bit. Now, okay, so who was the ruler at this time? Again, this is Alfonso V. Again, he's more of a protector of the Jews. He doesn't put any further restrictions upon them, but there is an influx, obviously, of these Jews who have now come to live within his country, but he's taking advantage of them, okay, because of their expertise, and they're bringing, wealth into Portugal. So he actually, and Abarbanel already, his grandfather already had this position, and the father, in fact, already was the royal treasurer of King Alfonso, and then his son, Yitzchak Abarbanel, our famous commentator, he also succeeds him as the royal treasurer of Portugal, and that happened in the year 1471. So Abarbanel grew up in wealth, in comfort, and relative security. And I read years ago, so I can't even tell you the title of the book, but it was a wonderful book about a Jewish family living in Portugal. And I could tell from the way they're describing the person, but he's very immersed in Jewish learning. They're talking about Abarbanel, but I think it was a fictional account, so they're giving him a different name. But it kind of brought this time period to life. So again, things are good for Abarbanel, and he's flourishing. His level of learning is continuing. This is starting to write his commentaries, etc., etc. And by the time we come to 1481, he's actually literally the most powerful courtier in that court of Alfonso V. Things never last, unfortunately. And there is another king that, right? Because in 1481, Alfonso dies, and it is his son, his successor. His name is John II. And he went as hero from 1481 to 1495. So this is going to take us right into 1492, where the Jews are going to be expelled from Spain. Now, something happened. Abarbanel apparently always resented this. I don't think he could understand it himself. Somehow the Zhao turned against him, or he was suspicious of him, and Barbanel totally loses favor at court, and it actually gives him that he's plotting against him, and he manages, I guess the last minute he escapes from Portugal and he goes to Spain, and that's when he will then be hired by Ferdinand and Isabel, not immediately, but a few years into his living in Spain, and he's going to become there also a chief financier, and he's the one who, together with Abraham Senor, to help to finance that campaign to push out the Moors, the Muslims from southern Spain. Okay, now I'm not going to tell you so much more about Barbanel. We have talked about him before, but I just wanted to put it all, so you can see the total picture of what's going on. So what's happening in 1492? Now we already have this Zhao II, now he's the king. He already, for whatever reason, and I don't think our Barbanel ever truly understood why he turned against him. But obviously you can see that there's some certain elements of anti-Semitism within this king, but he does allow in 1492, when those Jews will be expelled from Spain, the chief place that they're going to go to is Portugal. You can just see as the landmass, they are contingent, they are right on top of Spain. The languages are somewhat similar. They are different, but they are somewhat similar, and it was obviously easier for Jews to make their way to Portugal. And he does accept them, all right? It's not like they're all secretly crossing the border. They're not. They will be, but always with a caveat. So don't think that it was also perfect, because sometimes you'll learn, they came in 1492, then there was the Edict of Expulsion, 1497, things weren't so perfect right from the get-go. So what he does is he literally grants these Jews who are fleeing Spain, who want to live outward lives as Jews, he only grants them a temporary asylum. And it was for 8 months only. And they had to pay exorbitant fees to be granted permission to actually live there. So the only people who really will get refuge are the very wealthy Spanish Jews, those who were perhaps in that merchant class, and I read this in a few sources, so I found this very interesting. Those who were engaged in the munitions manufacture or trade, obviously because since he started campaigns, he's starting the beginning of this age of exploration. So I guess he needed to build up his army. So that's why he allowed them, these people who had expertise in munitions, to come into his country. What about all those poor Jews? As we know, the bulk of the people are the poor element. Well, where were they going to come up with the money to pay him? Again, it was an exorbitant amount of money. So he said, well, if you can't afford to pay me the residence fee to live here in my country, okay, I'm going to help provide boats for you, and the boats will carry you to other lands, other destinations, But what he did, he actually literally tricked them. First of all, the captains on board these boats treated them most cruelly. And what happened to them is the bulk of them are now declared slaves of the country, and they were literally sold. Some of them would have been sold within Portugal itself to certain members of the nobility who had the funds, to pay for them. And others, were just transported to other countries and sold as slaves. I imagine a lot of them ultimately, through Pigeon Shavulim, met their freedom. Other Jews came to their aid and, paid for them to become free men. But we don't know 100% what happened to all of them. I mean, really, it was really unscrupulous how they treated these poor Jews. And apparently kind of violence was done to the Jews, whatever. I mean, really terrible. So, here you might think, oh, how nice in 1492, the King of Portugal allowed the Jews to settle there. But, you got to delve more deeply into it. And you see, it wasn't, it wasn't from this great generosity party. Either they had the money to pay, which is obviously only a very small segment, of these Jewish immigrants, or that's it. He sold them. It really made them the property of the king, and that allowed them to be sold. And I've seen this in two different places. I myself am very confused about this because when we come to 1497, I want to tell you a somewhat similar story. It appears, I mean, I like the fact that I associate it with more with 1497, but it could be it started already in this 1492, let's say 1493 period, because I remember they're expelled. The final expulsion is early August. I told you they do have 8 months that they can initially live in Portugal, before they are then thrown out if they can't come up with the money. So apparently they say that quite a number of Jewish children, while the parents are sold as slaves, a number of these Jewish children are, so to speak, kidnapped and taken to this island called St. Thomas. It's called Sao Tome, just off the coast. It's not the St. Thomas, the Virgin Islands. We're talking about off the coast of Africa, where they were forced to convert and be raised as Christians. And I read not too long ago that there are actually some people living still on this island who feel that they are descendants of these original Jewish children. I don't know how fully Jewish they are, so it's a little unclear. But the fact that they even know that this is part of their heritage, I think that's quite interesting. Now, this similar story is going to take place in 1497, so that's why I'm not sure. I told you I always look at several sources, but some say that some of these Jewish children were already brought to this island already, let's say 1493. So or maybe it began here. I don't know. I have to tell you an excellent book I recommend. It's actually considered like a young adult novel, and it's put out by Art Scroll. I don't know, it's like all those books, that they publish. I mean, the novel type books. But this one is really terrific. It really came out years ago. It's called The Exiles of Crocodile Island. I read it as an adult, and I found it fascinating. And it is about what happens to these Jewish children. Obviously, it's coming from Art Scroll, so they want to show you that these children clung to their Judaism. Obviously, it couldn't go on through the generations, whatever. But it's a wonderful book, and it describes what it's like. And I guess it's called Crocodile Island because I guess there were crocodiles there. Okay, so now let's go on a little bit. Now, this man, right, this Zhao II, he dies in 1495. Okay, we haven't even come yet to that edict of expulsion, which I told you will be in a few years hence. Okay, who is the next king? His name is Manuel. Now he understands that there's definitely an advantage to having these Jews in his midst, especially obviously the wealthier ones, or the ones who had the potential to bring money into the kingdom. However, so I would say, I think his attitude in general toward the Jews was sort of, okay, you can stay here, it doesn't matter to me. I don't think he cared one way or another whether they did or did not practice Judaism. But he wanted to make an alliance with the king and queen of Spain. And he wanted to, all marriages at that point, royal marriages, they're all done for political gain. So that he approaches them, or I don't know, maybe possibly even they approached him. I don't know quite how it worked. They had a daughter, also called Isabella, and she's offered in marriage to King Emmanuel. But Ferdinand and Isabella insist that if you want to marry our daughter, and don't forget, and you got to say, Emmanuel would very much like to marry this princess from Spain, because then he could see, ultimately, maybe he'll roll over both the countries together. So for him, it's a very important alliance. But they're putting down a stipulation. Well, we will only allow you to marry our daughter if all those Jews who are now living in your midst, that you've allowed to come, and not he personally, but, have allowed to come and live in your land, they all have to convert to Christianity or be expelled, or you cannot marry our daughter. So again, I don't think he really cared one way or another whether the Jews remained as Jews or not, but he wants to make this politically advantageous marriage. So he agrees to their demands. At the very end of 1496, he issues this edict of expulsion. Now, as opposed to Ferdinand and Isabella, who literally gave like 4 months for the Jews to live, he says, okay, you don't have to leave until the end of October. So that's nice. He gave him 10 months. And either that, either you convert or and if you're not willing to convert, either leave or otherwise we're going to kill you. Well, not too much of a choice, is there? And apparently, in the end, he actually treated them quite cruelly. As I say, initially, I don't think it mattered so much to him because obviously, everything was okay until he wanted to have this arranged marriage and to make this alliance with Spain. So picture this, because we've just celebrated Pesach. So now I'm going to show you this connection between that story of the children and this story now. So either sometime 1493 or begin maybe in 1493, maybe they did kidnap some Jewish children. So it's a little unclear. But for sure, we know this for a fact, this was the first day of Pesach. I don't know if they did it the night of the first Seder or the next day, but it was April 1497. And all of a sudden, he sends out all his gendarmes to arrest all the Jewish children throughout Portugal, up to those who were, I read one source that they arrested you could say really they kidnapped them, the Jewish children in the ages of 4 and 14, all right? And he drags them out of their home. They had to be forcibly baptized. And he wants the parents to remain. He doesn't want to lose these Jews. They're bringing great wealth to his country. But he also wants to marry, this Spanish princess. So he has to accede to the demands, of her parents. But the Jewish reaction to this, don't forget, these are the Jews who always wanted to remain and live their lives as Jews. These are no longer conversos. These are true Jews, all right? They have adopted, already not to become Christians. So I can just imagine how these parents, how would you feel, God forbid, we're already grandparents, but like, somebody should come to your house and, forcibly, kidnap your precious children and whatever. It just must have been awful. They say that many Jews literally killed themselves. They just couldn't bear, living under such conditions. And those who maybe had even some advance notice that perhaps this is what was happening, the children were being arrested and dragged out of their homes. They even, killed their children. So this should, not happen to them. Meanwhile, there's this edict, right, that they're supposed to get out by the end of October. But Manuel lets the date go by. So maybe they think temporarily, oh, we've been spared, we can stay here. He's really not going to, follow through. All of a sudden, he tells them, they say, well, at least 20,000. It's hard to know exactly how many Jews went from Spain to Portugal. I don't know. Let's say, I don't know, maybe even if there were 50,000, 80,000, I have no idea. But 20,000 of them are called to the port in Lisbon. I mean, obviously, you could see how the country I showed you, it's surrounded by water on two sides. But he says to them, well, those of you who are going to be forced to leave now, you have to go to the port of Lisbon. I mean, it certainly is probably the major port, but there are other ports, in this country. They're all gathered together there in this big square in Lisbon. And then all of a sudden, meanwhile, and the children of many of these people, their children have been kidnapped. They've been separated, from their children. And, they thought, okay, we'll be able to finally leave. We'll start our lives again someplace else. But apparently they were herded there, together. They're denied food and drink. So they're starving there and dying of thirst. And they're saying, you must convert to Christianity. He did not want to lose these people. He wanted them to stay, within Portugal. And then he has all these apostates come and preach to them to try to convince them. And again, these are people who always wanted to remain as Jews. So they're not they're not so willing, to convert. So they just kind of drag them over to the baptismal font, sprinkle the water on them. So, okay, you're Christians now. Now, apparently, a lot of Protestant churchmen, even the Pope, the Pope had also criticized Isabella with her craziness, and now local churchmen within Portugal are also criticizing. This is no way to behave. This is how we want people to convert. You're forcing them. You're stealing their children. They're saying, how horrible this is. So he finally said, okay. He gives them like a time period of clemency. Either to remain as Christians or look, he's already, agreed to the fact that if you want to remain as Jews, you got to leave the country. But he said, okay, I'll give you time, for it for a little while. But they still couldn't reach those who, now again, there are these 20,000 Jews who have been forced, to convert to Christianity. So he says, well, you still can't return to living your Jewish lives here in Portugal. That's definitely it. And I don't want you can't leave the country either. But you know what? You stay here. I won't bother you so much anymore. I won't persecute you so much. I mean, what choice of these people had? It was really a very untenable situation. So again, are these children, remember I told you, that have been taken from them, is that story that I told you that they're taken to this island, right? Sao Tome. Does that refer to a little earlier period, or is it actually referring to this time period of 1497? But apparently this really truly did happen, that Jewish children were kidnapped and forced to go and live on this island off the coast of Africa. Okay, well, now we have these Jews, conversos, right? New Christians. They're always called new Christians. Those old Christians won't ever let them forget the fact that, they're not really properly, Christians, from the original, going back centuries. So in the year 1504, we're going to like 1497, so we're not talking about so many years later. Again, there are pogroms, there are attacks upon these conversos who were living in Portugal. But I do believe that from Manuel's perspective, he wanted things just to be, let these people live here. I don't care what's going on in their houses. Like, want to practice Judaism, that's their business. But, outwardly, we're all one big happy Christian family. But, there are people living in Portugal who are very resentful of this influx of new Christians. They don't want them there, and they don't trust them. So, again, that's why all these attacks upon them. And apparently then in the year 1506, it was a horrible plague. We always get blamed for everything. And as a result, there were more and more attacks upon the Jews, and apparently thousands of them were killed. And the main one happening in Lisbon. By the way, going back to that big square in Lisbon that I told you, from which the Jews, were forcibly retained and forced to convert to Christianity. So Shalom told me he's been to Portugal twice already. Actually, once he led a tour group there. And today, if you go to this huge plaza area, there is a plaque there, attesting to the fact of what happened to the Jews who had lived there, in that year 1497. Okay. So actually, at this point, Manuel even allows some of the conversos to actually live, and he sees what's happened to them. But this, I find this so ironic. So you could understand why they would go to another country. Obviously, these are people who want to live their lives freely as Jews. Some of them even opted to go back to Spain. Seems unbelievable, doesn't it? But I don't know. I guess it's up for us to judge them, right? But I guess they still wanted to live in some land that's familiar to them. The language is familiar to them. They probably still have relatives back in Spain, but obviously going back to Spain, also they must live as conversos. They can no longer live outwardly as Jews anymore. And meanwhile, he does, alleviate some of the conditions for those conversos, these new Christians who are living still in Portugal. And he actually sets out a law, that he says, you know what, you can live here for 10 years. I don't care what you're doing, again, privately in your own homes. You can live your quiet little Jewish lives, obviously outwardly as Christians. And I'm not going to bother you for 10 years, up until 1517. Now, God knows what's going to happen to them in 1517. But for 10 years, no one's going to go searching in their house, looking for Jewish relics or see if they're celebrating Jewish holidays or lighting Shabbos candles or anything. I don't care what you do, just again, outwardly live your Christian lives. But in 1524, again, cases are going to come out to the public, accusing these conversos, these new Christians, of not being properly loyal Christians. And unfortunately, as I've been telling you now for the past several hundred years of what's been happening, it is an apostate Jew. His name was Enrique Núñez. He came originally from Castile, and he was one of the main organizers of this terror attack upon the Jews of Portugal. Again, some conversos are allowed to leave. The conversos were not allowed to leave. I told you, remember, he wants their wealth, he wants their expertise to remain within the country. And anybody was caught trying to escape Portugal at this time period, around the year 1524, they were killed on the spot. Now this is already during the reign, actually, to the beginning attacks, then I told you they're allowed to live there peacefully up until the year 1517. But then Manuel dies, in 1521. So the next ruler to come into place is John III, or Zhao III, and he rules from 1521 to 1557. So things won't be good under him, because in 1531, the Inquisition, up until now, there's been no Inquisition, in Portugal. It has been just in Spain, and will continue in Spain until 1821. But now the Inquisition is given permission now by this new king to come into, to have their court proceedings, blah, 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 accuse people, of not living decent, Christian lives. There is, what did I tell you? The year was 1531, right? Okay. And now, if you were able to afford it, all right, there's even another king. His name is Sebastian. He's from 1531. If I have these dates right. Maybe these were the years of that John III. In any case, apparently he comes to live, rule over 1531 to 1578. He did allow conversos to leave, again, for a fee. And many of them will eventually find their way to freedom. And this basically comes to the end. I just want to tell you, in 1540 was the first auto da fe in Portugal. The whole idea of the Inquisition is to root out heretics. So it could be even Christians who aren't proper Catholics, could be tried and found guilty. But of course, the main aim was to root out these conversos, these new Christians who really were secretly still practicing Judaism. And so over the next, I'm going to say 200 years, these Portuguese Jews will gradually find ways to escape, to get out of Portugal, to go to live in other lands where they can live their lives openly and freely as Jews. So I'm just going to tell you some of the places that they went to. So it's not going to happen as much in the 16th century, right? In the 1500s, some will definitely start leaving. It's going to happen much, much more in that 17th century. We're going to see big, much larger movements of Jews out of Portugal to other lands. And where do they go? So we know many of them found their way to the Ottoman Empire, which at this point is, Constantinople had fallen in 1453. So there's no longer Christian presence there. The Muslims are ruling over. And so they are welcome to settle in the Ottoman Empire. So they're going primarily to Constantinople then becomes Istanbul. All right. Some of them go into the Balkan countries as well. Those are Muslim lands. And they will find a refuge there. Many of them go to Salonika, Greece, which is also ruled over by the Ottomans, okay? And so they can practice their religion freely there. Obviously, some will go to North Africa. I'll talk a little bit about the Jews who live in North Africa. But some of them are going to find their way to Europe. And even those on their way to let's say, to Constantinople, to Istanbul, they are going to go, they don't go immediately. They're not traversing the entire Mediterranean. They're first going to manage to get out somehow of Portugal, and they're going to go to Italy, and they will establish a presence there. And then from there, they will go further eastward. But some of them are going to take a more northerly route, and they will go mostly to the Netherlands, to Amsterdam, which had been ruled over by Spain, but when we're coming to the time period of the Reformation, this will now become a Protestant country. You know, I'm sure you've heard of the Dutch Reformed Church. They hated Catholics. And so when the Jews finally reach there, you know, they're welcomed and they can live very freely. And it will be some of these Dutch Jews, some coming from Holland, but some actually coming directly from Portugal, go to London. That's where Shalom has his show, the Baptist Marks Synagogue, which was founded by these Spanish Portuguese Jews. And then, you know, ultimately they're all going to go to the New World, which is owned now mostly, I mean, the English, of course, are further north, but it's really Spanish America, Central America, you know, South America, the islands or the Caribbean. They are initially, you know, developed by these Spanish and Portuguese traders, and then become, you know, colonies of Spain and Portugal. And that's where these Spanish Portuguese will go. Ultimately, they'll find their way to live freely as Jews. They're no longer such religious Jews living in a lot of these areas, but they know that they have their Jewish heritage. And apparently, if you go to the Caribbean and let's say you would go to a Jewish cemetery there, all their gravestones are all written in Portuguese, because these were originally Portuguese Jews. Even if they left Portugal and they went to Holland or England and then came to the New World, that's their language. It's Portuguese. And that's, you know, why all their gravestones, you know, are written that way. You know, I can talk more about that, you know, at a later date. I just wanted to mention a little bit, remember I talked to you how some of them go to Salonika, Greece. I mean, I don't know if you've read any accounts what happened to those Greek Jews and during the time period of the Holocaust. They were almost entirely wiped out. But they had this beautiful, beautiful, rich life there from the time that the Jews, you know, were settled there, you know, at some time in those 1500s up until 1943, and just totally wiped out. I just this past year, I read several accounts of the Jews of Salonika. And that was one of the main things. Not just there were Jews elsewhere. I remember I talked to you about the Jews of the Balkans or of other parts of Greece. So, you know, Cameron and I, you know, both come from Rochester. In Rochester, there's a Sephardic synagogue called Light of Israel, and it was founded in the early 1900s by Jews of Monastir. Monastir originally was part of Greece, but then it becomes part of Bulgaria. In any case, it was those Jews. Times were very bad in the early 1900s, and they came to America, and of all places, from Rochester, you know, and maybe that's where they founded their congregation. You know, we know, of course, about the Jews in Constantinople. We'll talk more about that. And then eventually, the original Jews returning to live in Israel are these Spanish Portuguese Jews. They were coming from, they left Portugal, they go to Italy, from Italy to Istanbul, and Istanbul they come to Israel, and then so up until really into the latter part of the 19th century, most of the Jews living in Israel were descendants of these Spanish Portuguese Jews. They were not the Ashkenazim, you know, they come at a much later date. Remember I talked to you about Italy. Obviously some of these Jews went to Venice, but there's also on the western half of Italy is a town called Livorno. And then from Shalom, that even a lot of those Portuguese Jews who then settled in London, they came from Livorno. So that's where they have. I think even Sir Moses Montefiore's family was from Livorno. And Shalom said even their way of praying is very similar to that of the Jews of Italy. Let me see any other. Oh, this is so interesting. They also ended up all the way in northern Germany. Would you believe this? In Hamburg. I don't know why they chose such a cold place to go live, but it's a major port. Again, if they're merchants, I guess that's where they're seeking out. They're seeking out places from where they continue to conduct their business. Shalom told me he's been to Hamburg, but he said there's really nothing left there of the Spanish-Portuguese presence. I mean, there had been, I guess, at one point, a synagogue there, but it does not exist at all. Okay, some Jews will go into France. Now they officially are not allowed into France. They're going as Christians into France, and they will settle in Bayonne and in Bordeaux. And I don't know if you know this, but the chocolate industry, the importation of chocolate to Europe came from the New World, is through these cities. And the Jewish merchants were the ones who brought chocolate, particularly cocoa. Before they, how the English drink their tea, but up until, tea was important because of British connection with India, everyone went to these coffee houses. That's where you would conduct your business at these coffee cafes. So in any case, I thought that was so interesting. So many layers and layers here. Obviously, I told you they go to North Africa as well. And here we are, we're spread out all over the world. It's truly, truly amazing. And so many of those people, those initial ones, can trace their descendants, the fact that they come from Spanish Portuguese Jews. Now the Ladino languages, so you understand, it's not what Shalom likes to call the Western Sephardim. These are the people who then went to settle in the Ottoman Empire. So that's what Ladino is. Like the Jews of London and Jews of Amsterdam were not speaking Ladino. I remember taking a tour. First of all, when the Jews came to America, there were 5 cities where they went to settle. These are all Spanish Portuguese Jews. And of course, one is New York City, and there still exists a Mikveh Yisrael Shul in Philadelphia, obviously Newport, Rhode Island, and Charleston and Savannah, Georgia. If you've never been to Charleston or Savannah, I highly recommend you can go and visit their congregation. They are Reformed today, but they're very, very proud of their Spanish Portuguese ancestry. They have museums associated with their congregations, and it's truly amazing. As they say, they all decided, like in the 19th century, they did escape up their beautiful heritage. They all became Reformed, synagogues. But they haven't forgotten their roots, and they're proud to show they sometimes have some very old Torahs there, that date back. So their presence was really made all over the world. Okay, I think I've covered everything for now. We will do next time. I want to tell you a little bit about the Jews of North Africa, because I think it's quite interesting, and a few key rabbanim. Then what I want to do ultimately is I want to make a review, so we should sort of put it into proper perspective. This whole era, what I call of the Rishonim, those are very, very great rabbanim. And it's mostly from like the 11th through the 15th century. So I started working on a chart, that will show you from each country in each century. So, where so many of their names sound so familiar. But what I want to do very much